Hey there, Jake here from CVP. Blackmagic announced the PYXIS 12K all the way back at NAB earlier this year, and since then people have been chomping at the bit to get hold of them, and thankfully they have finally started shipping, and we have our demo unit here with us today. The PYXIS 12K takes the body design of the PYXIS 6K and the sensor used in the Ursa Cine 12K and combines them together to offer Blackmagic's unique RGBW sensor technology in a much more manageable form factor compared to the larger Ursa Cine. We've taken deep dive looks at both of these cameras previously, so in today's video I want to talk about the differences between them and explore why the PYXIS 12K is a really interesting camera at its price. Let's get into it. Before getting into the testing, I want to just do a little recap of the fantastic sensor inside this camera. If you already know all about this 12K RGBW sensor, please skip to this timecode to get to our testing. I think one of the biggest pulls of the PYXIS 12K is of course the full frame 12K sensor inside of it. This is the same RGBW 12K sensor found in the Ursa Cine 12K and 17K, which of course uses a wider 17K version of it. This sensor has a resolution of 12,288 by 8,040 pixels, a physical size of 35.635 by 23.316mm, giving it a diagonal of 42.585mm, and it has a pixel pitch size of 2.9 microns, which is pretty small. This sensor is still a CMOS sensor, but uses a new CFA or color filter array that has the same number of red, green, and blue photosites, as well as additional white or clear photosites. This is different from the 1 red, 2 green, and 1 blue of the Bayer pattern. So instead of the Bayer 2x2 grid, this new pattern uses a 6x6 grid. 6 green, 6 blue, 6 red, and 18 white. I know a lot of people think that using a camera that is 12K is pretty insane, especially when it's only really been a few years that 4K has become the norm. And this has around 10 times the resolution of 4K. So why would anyone need to shoot at 8K, let alone 12K? Well, there are a few reasons, such as downsampling, reframing, stabilizing, remastering, pulling stills, and VFX and green screen work. However, one of the best things about this camera is that you don't need to shoot 12K. You can shoot at 8K and 4K while still using the full sensor and 9K, which crops into Super 35. Instead of cropping in to shoot at lower resolutions, the sensor can scale down to lower resolutions while still using the full sensor with no pixel binning because of its symmetrical design and the use of B-RAW. With this scaling, it also changes the data rate, which means if you don't want to shoot at 12K because of the huge data rates it can have, you can lower your resolution and still get detailed images and save on storage. Doing this in camera over in post will still give you some of the benefits of downsampling, but results will be better recording in 12K and downsampling in post in several ways. On 4K timelines, this is less noticeable, but when viewing the 12K footage on an 8K timeline, you can see a clear difference between the in-camera downsampled footage and the full 12K image. The PYXIS 12K is inevitably going to be compared to the PYXIS 6K and the Ursa Cine 12K, so lots of our testing is going to include those cameras. We've reviewed both of these cameras previously, so if you want to learn more about them and see them compared to a range of other camera systems, please check those videos out. Before we get into the Latitude testing, I noticed something while reading through the updated PYXIS manual. If we look at these dynamic range charts, we can see something interesting. They're actually separated between the 12K and 9K modes, and then the 4K and 8K modes. This is because when you're in the 8K or 4K sensor mode, it operates differently to 12K or 9K. It effectively shifts your dynamic range distribution by a stop compared to the 12K mode. So ISO 800 in 12K and 9K is mapped the same as ISO 1600 in the 8 and 4K modes. You also lose about a third of a stop of total dynamic range when you go into 8 or 4K. So with this in mind, we executed our Latitude tests in both 12K and 8K so we can visualize the difference. For these tests, we used our 50mm Nissi Athena and then PL adapters from Nissi on the PYXIS cameras. Here's a breakdown of the rest of our methodology for these tests and the different formats we shot across the cameras. Right, let's take a look at the results. All of these tests are with Blackmagic's highlight recovery in Resolve turned off. Toggling this on can help bring back some clipped highlight information, but the results can look great or a bit odd depending on the scene. Anyway, looking at our overexposure test first, we can see that the PYXIS 12K holds information well up until around 4 2/3 stops over, where we can start to see white on our chart clipping. Weirdly, as we go through the stops, we can see a slight shift in white balance, and by 5 stops over, Sam's skin is starting to look really yellow. This is correctable with white balance, but it's a bit odd. At 5 stops over, we can also see white on our chart as clipped now as well. At 5 1/3, Sam's skin starts to clip, and certain colours on our chart start clipping as well. As we hit 6 stops over, I think performance here is actually pretty good, especially when we compare it to the 6K. The 6K white clips much sooner, and so does Sam's skin, but given the rated dynamic range difference, that isn't too surprising. The performance of the Cine 12K is incredibly similar to the PYXIS 12K, which is good to see. However, it doesn't have the same yellow shift that the PYXIS 12K does, and neither does the 6K. This is something that we have fed back to Blackmagic. Looking at the PYXIS 12K in 12K versus 8K, we can see that the 8K performance is shifted down by about a stop, which is exactly what Blackmagic says in their manual. If you want the same highlight performance in 8K or 4K, you'll need to rate the sensor at ISO 1600 and expose accordingly. Looking at underexposure, the PYXIS 12K looks good down to about 3 stops under. At 4 stops, we start to get quite green and blocky noise. Saturation on Sam's skin looks like it's shifted, and at 5 stops, detail is still held well, but there is a heavy green cast. Comparing the PYXIS 12K to the Cine 12K, I think at 3 stops, noise looks similar. The Cine 12K handles saturation and colour a little bit nicer. The PYXIS 12K requires a little bump of saturation to match it somewhat. The 6K looks good down to 3 stops under, and I think overall colour looks better than the PYXIS 12K. This might be because the noise is a bit pinker and purpler in colour compared to the 12K's green noise. At 4 stops under, you can see CMOS smear and more purple noise, which the 12K sensors don't have. The PYXIS 12K is rated for the same 16 stops of dynamic range that the Ursa Cine 12K has. This should be a nice increase from the PYXIS 6K, which is rated for 13 stops. We wanted to illustrate the dynamic range difference between the PYXIS 6K and 12K in a more real-world setup. So we mounted the cameras up side by side and captured close to the same shot with both cameras simultaneously. We used the same 50mm Miki lens on each camera and the same Polar Pro NDs. We matched exposure across both cameras using a stop's worth of extra ND on the 12K to deal with the 2 different base ISOs, as the 6K's base is ISO 400. We then exposed to mid-grey and changed the aperture to over and underexpose. When we look at the same clips back to back in Resolve, we can see how much extra information the 12K is able to pull back in the highlights compared to the 6K. It's quite a substantial difference, but given how Blackmagic have rated these cameras, this should be what we see. These examples are in 12K, but if we look at an 8K clip, we can see less highlight retention compared to the 12K footage at the same ISO, and a little bit less range overall. So if you want to get the absolute best image quality out of this camera possible, shooting in 12 or 9K is the way to go. But there are a few reasons to shoot in 8K or 4K, the first being to do with the camera's sensor readout speed. Blackmagic have a fantastic forum post which details the readout speeds of all of their cameras across the different recording modes that they all have. This is great to have access to, but we of course wanted to double check their numbers ourselves with our own in-house measuring tool and software. The Ursa Cine 12K has some really impressive numbers considering the size and resolution of the sensor. 12 milliseconds in open gate is fantastic, and I was hoping the PYXIS 12K would perform close to this. Unfortunately, because Blackmagic have had to limit the sensor's performance in the smaller PYXIS body, it does mean the readout speed is slower than the Cine 12K. Comparing the two, the PYXIS 12K readout is double that of the Cine 12K at the same resolution and sensor area. Roughly 24 milliseconds in 3x2 open gate is quite high, and actually quite comparable to the PYXIS 6K, but thankfully because of how the RGBW sensor has been designed, you can shoot in 8K or 4K while still using the full sensor and get faster readout times. Dropping down to 8K 3x2 reduces the readout speed to roughly 13.5 milliseconds, which is really good. And if you crop into 16 or 17:9, you can get even better performance. I think this is going to be very helpful as it means that if you can deal with the higher readout in 12K and want the extra resolution, you have that option to choose. And then if you'd rather sacrifice some resolution for a faster readout speed, you can just shoot in 8 or 4K. Is 24 milliseconds unusable? Of course not. But it's worth knowing this limitation, so if it is something that will frustrate you, you can just work around it. With the reduction in readout speed also comes a reduction in frame rates versus the Cine 12K. The PYXIS 12K offers half of the maximum frame rates found in the Cine 12K. This means you can shoot 12K 3x2 open gate up to 40 frames per second, up to 50 in 12K 17:9, In 9K Super 35, this jumps up to 65 frames per second in 17:9. And then when you select 8K or 4K, you can do open gate up to 72 frames per second, 17:9 up to 90 frames per second, and 2.4 to 1 up to 112. These are some pretty decent frame rate options, and when compared to the PYXIS 6K and the Cine 12K, it kind of sits in the middle of them. The image itself in these higher frame rates looks nice, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more pushed out of it. The PYXIS 12K uses the same OLPF as the Ursa Cine 12K. Also known as an anti-aliasing filter, OLPFs are used on a lot of high-end cinema cameras to counter moire and aliasing. So if we film our focus chart and take a look at it, we can see that there is some moire and color aliasing present, but this is a really stressful situation and we are zoomed in quite a bit here. This is an 8K resolve timeline, and as we go from 12K down to 4K, we can see a reduction in detail and an increase in aliasing. 12K of course looks the best, but I think 8K also looks pretty good. 4K will definitely give you a softer image, which actually may be what some people want. Compared to the PYXIS 6K, we can see just how much more resolution there is in 12 and 8K compared to 6K. Comparing the 6K against the 4K 12K image, they are much closer though. I think the 6K has better looking aliasing and overall more detail than the 12K at 4K, but the PYXIS 12K shooting 8K is a step up in resolution. Here are some more examples of the PYXIS 12K compared to the 6K, but outside of our trusty beautiful fence. The PYXIS 12K has an ISO range of 125 up to 3200 and has a native ISO of 800. This is quite limited by today's standard compared to other cameras in its price, but for more traditionally designed cinema cameras, its range is fine, though I do wish it had a second base. This camera is definitely not a low light monster though, it's meant to be in nicely lit situations. In the past, Blackmagic cameras have suffered from IR pollution, so I wanted to see how the PYXIS 12K performs as well. With NDs on and off, the camera does a good job at cutting infrared light. This will most likely be thanks to the OLPF having some IR cut built in. We are using this Polar Pro ND, which we use across all of our IR pollution testing. As you can see from our examples, the large range of black fabrics don't shift red or pink. They are still very neutral, which is great. There is a slight colour shift, but that's probably from the ND, not from IR pollution. The PYXIS 12K comes with a 90 watt power supply out of the box, and we did manage to get some official power draw numbers out of Blackmagic. In a pretty normal shooting setup, it will run at approximately 66 watts and can be pushed up to a peak close to 85 watts. This does make it a bit more power hungry than a PYXIS 6K, but not by too much, and it's especially less than the Ursa Cine 12K. While these power draw numbers are helpful, I did want to run some battery life tests for ourselves. With the following camera settings, we managed to record for about an hour and 45 minutes continuously using a Hawkwood's 98 watt-hour BPU battery. If we divide the amount of minutes by the watt-hour of the battery, we can see how many watt-hours per minute it uses. We can then work out how some other size batteries should in theory last. How many batteries and what size you need will depend on what else you are planning on powering and how long you shoot per day. I've put links to some recommended batteries in the description. One of the biggest things I wanted to check on this camera is how it handled heat. The original 6K can get quite toasty, and so can the Ursa Cine 12K, so a camera that uses the PYXIS body design but uses the high resolution sensor inside of the 12K could potentially get quite hot. Looking into the top of the camera, we can see that there is a substantial heatsink inside. It looks far larger than the solution inside the PYXIS 6K. The PYXIS 12K draws cool air from the bottom and exhausts it out the top, so just bear that in mind when you're rigging and shooting. While shooting, the camera certainly did get a little hot, but nowhere near as hot as the Cine 12K did when we shot with that last year. We didn't have any warnings or random shutdowns from it getting too hot, which is good. Though we aren't shooting in the hottest environment here in the UK, so the camera may behave differently in warmer climates. Blackmagic actually rate the camera's operating temperature range between 0 to 40 degrees Celsius or 32 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. There are actually a few things that we noticed during our time testing the camera that I want to mention as well. First off, on the PYXIS 6K and the Cine 12K, you could use a USB-C to HDMI adapter to output the image out to a HDMI monitor if you wanted to. But weirdly, on the PYXIS 12K, which is currently running firmware 9.9, this doesn't work anymore. During our PYXIS 6K review, I said that having the UI rotate for portrait shooting on the built-in monitor would be awesome, and thankfully this has actually been added to the camera. The PYXIS monitor also rotates as well, which can make for some interesting configurations. In the menu, you can choose if you want this to happen automatically or lock the orientation which is nice as there will be people out there that find this auto-rotating annoying. With a nice handle attached, this makes the PYXIS a really nice camera to use for shooting portrait video. So what's the difference between the PYXIS 6K and the 12K? Well, as we've detailed, the biggest difference is the sensor, which changes everything related to the image that we've spoken about. Other than that, the 12K is roughly 100 grams heavier, has a higher power draw, which we've mentioned, which means batteries won't last as long, and the 12K can output video via both USB-Cs, whereas the 6K can only output it via the front USB-C. There is also a pretty substantial price difference currently between the PYXIS 12K and the 6K, but I still think the PYXIS 12K is competitive given the performance that it has. While it shares the sensor used in the Cine 12K, it shares a lot more with the PYXIS 6K. It has the same solid build quality, overall dimensions, built-in screen and button layout. It is available with 3 different lens mount options, uses Sony BPU style batteries for power, and can use CF Express Type B cards and external USB-C SSDs for recording media. This means that there are plenty of accessories on the market already for it. Out of the box, the PYXIS definitely needs some accessories to get it into a shooting package. Of course, how you configure it will come down to personal preference, but there are definitely some key things to think about. Just like the PYXIS 6K, the 12K is available with 3 different lens mounts, L, PL, and EF. If you're on a rock solid EF or PL mount, it's good that you have the option to choose those, but for most, I think L is the smarter choice. This is because you can use native L mount lenses, but also adapt to PL and EF with the correct adapter if you want to. And if you do choose to adapt, you can get mounts like this Kipetai Revolver or Adapter LC, which will allow you to use rear-mounted filters like ND or diffusion. This helps solve the lack of internal NDs and makes the camera even better to use, though of course you could use a regular front-mounted solution like a screw-on filter or matte box. The PYXIS 12K doesn't have a comprehensive autofocus system, so I would also think about a focusing solution. This could be you just focusing by hand with a manual follow focus system, or even with something like DJI's Focus Pro LiDAR system, which pairs really well with this camera. Recording media is a crucial investment for any camera system, but it's even more important for the PYXIS 12K because of how large the data rates can be. There currently isn't any recommended media on Blackmagic's support page, but there is for the Cine 12K, which has similar data rates at the same resolution and frame rate. The data rates can get pretty heavy on this camera if you shoot 12K, but at least you have the option to shoot more compressed and lower resolution if you don't want to deal with the storage requirements of 12K. Blackmagic has a really good data rate calculator that allows you to dial in the different combinations and then get a rough recording time per terabyte. This is really helpful when you're buying whatever media you need for this camera. I've put links to some approved media down below. You can also record externally to an SSD, but there are currently no recommended drives for that just yet. If you do want to record externally to an SSD, I really suggest testing it first before you get on set. By default, the PYXIS will stop recording if it drops frames, which will be helpful when testing recording media. When it comes to monitoring, you have a few options to look at. First off, you have Blackmagic's first-party solutions, which include their PYXIS monitor and the Ursa Cine viewfinder. Given the excellent price of the PYXIS monitor, I think it's a no-brainer with this camera given how nicely it controls the camera. It's also got a good range of mounting points as well, so you can rig it up with the kit from Blackmagic or with third-party rigging. This uses the USB-Cs on the camera to deliver both data and power, which is really nice. The USB-C cables are available as spares in case you do run into damaged cables, and Mid49 have created these 3D printed thumb screw extensions for the cable locks, which are incredibly fiddly to use normally. Their viewfinder is also an excellent option for this camera. This again uses USB-C to deliver power and data. It's also easily rigged and can actually be used at the same time as the monitor now with the PYXIS 12K, as you can use both of the USB-Cs for these either independently or at the same time. If you don't want to run these, you have a good range of outputs, so you can easily run a wired or wireless monitoring solution on the camera. There are a range of different cages and rigging solutions on the market now for the PYXIS systems, and because the 12K uses the exact same body shape and size as the 6K, all existing kits will work with the 12K. If you're going to be using the Blackmagic EVF or monitor, make sure you think about how these are going to be positioned when choosing your rig. The 12K uses the same BPU style battery as the PYXIS 6K. This means you have a range of Sony and third-party batteries to choose from. You can get a range of capacities and ones with different outputs built on if you need to power certain accessories. You can also get external battery plates for V-lock if you'd rather run the camera off of a larger source or with batteries that you already own. The PYXIS 12K has a single mini XLR input on the front and a 3.5mm jack input on the rear. This can make running audio into the camera a little challenging, but with the right accessories, it's easily done. You can either get mini XLR to full-size XLR cables, or even a little breakout box like the AB9 from Mid49. This connects to the mini XLR and to the 3.5mm input and provides two full-size XLRs. It can also be mounted pretty cleanly if you have some form of cage on the camera. I've put links to some of our key accessories for the PYXIS in the description below, and if you want some advice on how to rig up your PYXIS perfectly, drop demo@cvp.com an email to book in your own personal consultation with one of our experienced technical consultants. There are actually two things that I think Blackmagic should add to make the PYXIS systems as a whole more appealing to a wider range of shooters. The first is more compressed recording formats. Currently, you can only record in B-RAW and the low-resolution proxies you get at the same time. Blackmagic RAW is great, but there are still plenty of people who just need to record a standard 42 10-bit compressed format like ProRes or some kind of H.265 or H.264 compressed codec. This could be because you don't want to deal with the added workflow steps or data rates of shooting B-RAW, or you just need to deliver a file to a client or post that is more standard. It would be great to see 42 10-bit H.265 formats and ProRes options added, especially as we've seen ProRes in Blackmagic cameras before. The other big thing that I would love to see is the introduction of a reliable phase detect autofocus system, which they have actually added to the Cinema Camera 6K semi-recently. I'm really hoping this is something that they can add to this camera and their other ones, as I think a reliable autofocus system could really open up their potential user base even more. Most of Blackmagic's cameras have always leaned more towards being designed for more traditional cinema-inspired workflows, and the 12K also leans that way as well. But more and more solo operators are picking up these cameras now. The PYXIS 12K is £4,590 or €4,897 including taxes. This does put it in a rather competitive space with cameras like the Canon C80, DJI Ronin 4D, Sony FX6 and Red's Komodo cameras. There are so many excellent cameras on offer now, all with different pros and cons, and honestly, I think it can get a bit confusing for some people. So if you want some advice on what camera might be best for you, don't hesitate to get in contact with us via demo@cvp.com. The 12K full-frame RGBW sensor paired with the PYXIS form factor really does make this camera a compelling option for people looking for a camera that's designed around a slightly more cinema-inspired workflow than some of the other video-focused cameras at its price. The image it can capture is excellent, but it is worth understanding some of its limitations, which we've laid out in this video. Its boxy design allows you to easily rig it up however you'd like, and there are loads of different accessories now for it because of how long the 6K PYXIS has been out. The camera is finally shipping now and available to order on our website. If you're interested in ordering one for yourself, I've put links to it in the description. As I said earlier, we've reviewed the original PYXIS 6K and the Ursa Cine 12K in depth in previous videos, so if you want to learn more about this camera and those, please check those videos out. If you like the video, please give it a like and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.